Welcome to All Things LOCS, the show where we discuss everything related to leadership, operations, culture, and strategies. Now, on today's show, we got a real special treat for you. If you've ever wondered how to become more resilient, how to develop a resilient team, how to deal with burnout, you're going to learn a lot today. We have Dr. Eva Selhub, who is a graduate of Harvard. She's a pioneering physician, a resilience expert, an author, and is currently the chief of medical affairs at For Humanity Co. She's going to dive into all of that plus so much more. Dr. Selhub, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yes, we're so pumped. I feel like this could be an episode that could just go on forever. So we're going to do our best to keep it within our time constraints, so to speak. But I really want to start with, honestly, the main topic, that's something that you're really passionate about, which is resilience. And I know it's something that's been a very utilized word, especially over these last few years since the pandemic. But I do feel, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I do feel like a lot of people don't quite have a good grasp of what it actually means. And it's really associated with just simply overcoming setbacks. So I'd like to maybe start there. Just what is your definition of it, and what does it really look like in everyday practice?
It's a really, really good question because I think that what people, don't realize is that everybody is resilient. So the definition of resilience is the ability to bounce back after adversity, right? So you fall and you get back up. And when you fall, do you get back up now? Of course you do. When you fell when you were a baby or a child and you got back, it was easier. So resilience, the ability to bounce back after adversity is a spectrum of ability, right? And I think that's what, people think you're either resilient or you're not resilient, and it doesn't work that way. It's a spectrum, and a spectrum that changes over the lifespan, and also depending what else is going on in your life. I like to think of a branch, right? And you've got a baby branch, which is like really pliable, but it can't really hold a lot of snow. So the more snow that falls on it, it just kind of will collapse, and it can't hold the stress, it can't hold the weight. And then you've got like the older branch, like, the grandfather branch, which is large and weathered and wise. But also when a lot of snow falls on that branch, it actually will break because it's so brittle and hard after wear and tear of so many years. And there's that in-between branch that has grown, it's gone through stress, it's learned, it's become stronger, it's a little bit wiser, and it can hold that snow for a very long time and stay pretty pliable and flexible. So ultimately, elevated resilience is that place where we can handle stress, we can stay pliable, flexible, and adaptable despite that stress. And that would be the elevated form of resilience, which we call flourishing or fitness, if you will. You see, athletes who are, go under a tremendous amount of stress and they can just handle so much. The opposite of that would be burnout, where you just break, you can't handle anymore, or you just simply, the stress is overwhelming and you don't have the resources to handle it. So it's a spectrum.
I really love that we're going to be diving into this because I feel like it's a topic that, like, it's not really touched on very much. And as you just mentioned with these three branches, there's variations from person to person. Before we dive into that, tell us kind of a little bit about your background going into this, because people got to know, like, where you got your education from. How did you build this experience, learning about resilience and learning about developing that?
Well, I think as for most people, we dive into things either because somebody told us to, or, or because we suffered and we were trying to figure out a way to figure things out. And so resilience for me was more the latter, was more of my suffering. But I did go into wanting to understand human behavior and how to heal and how to thrive. That was something that I also was told to do, also go become a doctor. That's what you do. So the two kind of came together for me. I went to medical school, and then I started doing my residency, and I did my residency at a place called Boston City Hospital, which is now Boston Medical Center. And back in the 90s, if this is 1996, I was doing a procedure, and at that time I was gung-ho to be either I was going to work in the ER or work in ICUs, and I was going to save lives, and I was going to be that person that was the hero. And and I was 28 years old. I knew what I was doing, very driven, goal-oriented, kind of CEO type, but in the ER. And I was doing a procedure at about 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And it was putting this, big needle into the neck, which is called the central line. And the patient was on a ventilator and started moving, and the needle slipped and went into my finger. And so that patient had full-blown AIDS. And back in 1996, there was nothing that could be done about AIDS. People died horrible deaths. They had terrible diseases that would happen to them. And, in that moment, I'm like looking at this blood on my finger. And I talk about this a lot. I lecture about it and I ask people, what do you think I was experiencing in that moment? Do you have any idea?
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd run out. I don't know
Like,
what I'd do.
how the
Yeah.
hell could this happen to me, or why me?
Well, yes. So this is it. So this is very interesting. And so my first experience of emotion was not fear. Okay. My first experience was, what the heck did I just do? Was shame. And I thought, because usually if I screwed up or there was a screw up, I would always figure it out. That's one of the things about resilient people is that they usually can find a solution to a problem. It's not that they don't have problems, it's that they find solutions for them. They're not worried about it. They're like, bring it. I'm going to figure this out. I got this. And normally that was my mindset. But in that moment, I couldn't figure it out. And I thought, well, what have I done? And so then when I'm squeezing my finger and running it on the water and it's turning blue, and I'm realizing that I don't have a solution, that there is no solution, that's when the fear set in. That's when I was like, what am I going to do? I called the chief resident. Nobody really knew what to do. They said, go home and we'll call the attending. And there was a study that just came out from the NIH that put people on a slew of medications. I think it was like 14 pills a day for 6 weeks to prevent conversion. And I was started on it. I was one of the first people on that. And for 6 weeks, I took 14 pills a day, made me very sick, and I cried a lot. I just was in distress constantly, thinking I'm going to die. I'm going to have a horrible death. I'm single. No one's going to love me. I'm going to die alone. I'm going to die broke because I owe so much money for medical school. My parents co-signed. They're going to be broke. What have I done? And it was just like one catastrophizing thought after the next. And I was miserable. And the only thing that got me through was love and support that I got from my friends, colleagues, and families. But other than that, I was a wreck. But during that time, I kind of, had sort of a let me bargain. If there is a God, I promise I'll be a nicer person and I'll be more compassionate and I'll take care of the homeless and needy. I'll just, whatever it is I need to do, make this better.
Natural. Yeah.
Right? And I also thought about like, what are you doing? Is this really what you want to do with your life? Do you really need to be a hero? And risk your life to be a hero for what? What is this all about, saving lives as opposed to like supporting people to even have a life? Like that sort of started coming up, like what is wrong also with our culture that we, spend so much effort, in ICUs as opposed to putting effort into actually living our lives, fear of dying or desire to live, like which one is it? So I did obviously a lot of soul searching, and 6 weeks went by and I did not convert to HIV. So I had to hold up to my part of the bargain. And I started following a midwife around and working in sort of underserved areas and learning. And I was like, I'm really going to take this seriously. And then my dog died, and then my grandfather died. And then somebody started harassing me that I had to take to court. And then my apartment burned down. And then my father had a heart attack, and it all happened under 5 months. And every time something bad would happen, I would cry about it and then pick myself back up and say, okay, what is there for me to learn? What can I do? I, fall down and say, okay, what part am I accountable for? What did I do wrong the first time that I could do differently this time around? And I would go again. And by the time my father had a heart attack, 5 months later, I had nothing left. I was done. I couldn't smile. I couldn't think. I couldn't remember anything, which was a problem because I had to take my boards in a few months. And I just didn't want to live. I wasn't suicidal, but I didn't have the energy to live. And I went on like that, like a robot for about 4 or 5 months. And then one day a friend took me out to dinner and she said, we want you back. And I don't know what happened. To this day, 20 some odd years later or more, 30 years later, I don't know what happened. All I know was that I went home and I thought to myself, you've been asking the wrong question. All this time you've been asking, why me? Why does this happen to me? Why is this happening to me? What have I done wrong? Why me? And that's the wrong question. The question that you could be asking is, why not? Nature just as soon lets a forest fire burn as a flower bloom. It's not personal. You've been taking all of this personally. And why? What's this all about? And I decided that I needed to learn more about this. I needed to learn more about my mindset and where it came from, my belief system, my lack of self-worth, my lack of self-love, everything. I wanted to learn all about it, which is when I started volunteering at the Mind Body Medical Institute at Harvard, where I become a primary care doctor. And soon thereafter, they asked me to be the medical director. So I learned and taught all about stress and stress physiology and mind-body approaches to patient care, which are relaxation and nutrition and cognitive behavioral therapy and spirituality and social support and all the things that individuals can do to uplift their life and become more resilient. So I started in the resilience field in 1997, and it just kind of kept going. I opened up my own practice where I brought everything together. I started studying alternative medicine, bringing that in. And then I was writing books and being brought into corporate environments to work with leaders in resilience. And the next thing I know, I'm closing my practice and moving into working with companies and cultures and that sort of thing. So it's a long story, but that's how I got here.
That's a big turnaround, going from, the needle stick over to a devastating fire, to your father, to the dog, to just everything. And what would you say is with you studying it now, like especially going through that yourself, is one of the primary reasons why people have it and they don't have it? Do you feel like it's conditioning? Is it that nature versus nurture conversation? What do you think is actually that separator between people who collapse under adversity versus people that use it as fuel or an opportunity to get better?
That's a really great question, and something that we're researching and finding more and more about now that we're able to do sort of genetic testing. And it's really multifaceted and multifactorial. It's really fascinating, and this is why I get so excited about it. So on one hand, the way you're programmed, right? So you're basically, your brain is a blank slate when you come in. You have some ability to manage stress, but not a lot. So you're highly dependent on other people to show you how to manage the stress that will happen in the world, whether it's learning how to eat or learning how to walk or whatever that may be. And so your brain is developing a database of how to manage life, that you just automatically will reach into that database and you can figure things out. So most of our programming is happening before we have a full-fledged functioning brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, which is able to, what we call top-down control, can control our emotions, can have focused decisions, be able to stay calm and rational. And when we see a really good leader who's able to stay objective despite catastrophe and really tell people what to do, that's the prefrontal cortex working. That's the CEO doing its top-down control. Now, that part of our brain doesn't develop too much later in life. So during that time, your database is being created, right?
What time frames, like what ages are you looking at?
Well, we're looking at when it's fully developed, is usually in the late 20s.
That's about right. That's how I felt. I'm still waiting for mine to develop fully, but yeah, sounds about right.
So late 20s. But during that time, the sort of the primer, the template from which everything is based has already been formed, the first 12, 15 years of life. So any critical life event, especially early on, even inside the uterus, is affecting that stress response and is affecting how your brain perceives stress, manageable or unmanageable. Like I said, that was the difference with the needle stick. Can I handle it or can I not? So it's not so much stress that's an issue, but whether or not I believe I have the capacity to handle it. Do I think I'm going to be okay? And if 10 out of 10 times I was hungry and I was fed or had food, my brain will now anticipate that the future should be fine when it comes to food. But if 8 out of those 10 times I wasn't fed, it doesn't matter how much food I have in my refrigerator as an adult. My priming is that I'm never going to have enough.
I wonder how much of this is a factor in determining who is a high performer, because I can't help but think about that test with kids, like don't eat the marshmallow. You know what I'm talking about? Where it's essentially delayed gratification. and which is kind of a form of stress of not eating the marshmallow. So but that was actually one of the biggest studies that came out, that was like when they followed these children going into adulthood, that the ones that had the biggest delay of gratification were actually more high performing. Is there any type of correlation between like resiliency and maybe high performing?
Sure. But let's go back to genetics. Okay, so that's like programming, right? Depending on your family, what happens, critical life events. So all those things are going to be affecting how we learn to adapt with a given situation, right? It's cultural, societal. All those things are influencing how we might choose to handle a given situation. Then come genetics, and there are several different genetic predispositions that people have to be either resilient or not resilient. There's an enzyme called COMT that a lot of people are talking about, which is catecholamine methyltransferase, which breaks down dopamine and norepinephrine. And in the prefrontal cortex, it's the major enzyme to break down dopamine. So there's people who are slow metabolizers, fast metabolizers, and mixed metabolizers. So a fast metabolizer actually needs a little bit of stress to feel motivated and do things, and they do well. They do well under like they multitask, and they do well under sort of mildly stressful situations. And without it, they just feel like blobs. They're unmotivated. And then you have the slow metabolizers. You can think of them as if those people grow up in like, I guess, the desert versus somebody who grows up on the north where the weather is really harsh and changes all the time. But a person with a slow metabolism needs it to be more quiet, and they get overwhelmed if there's too much, stress going on. They already have lots of dopamine in their brains, so they can get flooded with dopamine, which is overwhelming, as opposed to somebody who doesn't have a lot of dopamine and is used to getting rewards right away. So they are more likely just, to get a reward, they get their shot of dopamine and then they move on because they have low dopamine to begin with. So if you take, like, again, in my example, I'm a slow metabolizer, which means that, in general, I'm already sensitive. I'm sensitive to, my imagination is sensitive. I'm sensitive to being able to feel people and everything. I already have high levels of dopamine. I'm already on high alert. So then you throw in situations like I had in my family where I was raised to be responsible and take care of things and take on the archetype of caretaker. Then my adaptation is, if I take care of everything, then I'll feel safe. Then like this nervousness will go away. So we develop adaptations and behavior mechanisms so that whatever bad feeling we're having will go away. So it's going to also be dependent on what that feeling is to begin with for people and the adaptive responses that they then create. And then the archetypes and personalities, it's really fascinating. So somebody who is, feeling, I don't need to have that reward. I feel fine as it is. I can wait. Is much more likely going to be able to stay balanced and stable when it comes to getting things done. They're not going to be less distracted and so on and so forth.
And I don't know if this is the worst or best example, but it almost really just makes me think of the personalities that thrive in the Northeast. And you mentioned like weather, but me being from, you were in Boston, but I was around New York City, northern New Jersey, so very, high energy, high moving, and then you compare that to the people on the West Coast, and it's such a clash, right? But then you think of, it's just the weather. But then who thrives in Midtown Manhattan versus who's thriving in Delray Beach, California? It's a very different person, and you kind of change the environment on them, and to your point, they'll either usually crumble. You take that person from New York City into quiet. I mean, I know even for me, I'd be on my honeymoon, and after a few days, I'm like, can we get back to work? I'm getting a little antsy here. This is not actually relaxing. It's taking me out of my comfort zone. So I totally understand what you're saying there. And when you mentioned a word that I just want to touch on a little bit as well, which is adaptability, and this aspect of how many of us nowadays want to basically have an idea of what the future is going to bring us, right? It's that I need to predict and plan everything out versus being able to just deal with life as it comes at us, which we know is a very uncertain life that we all have. So when you're coaching people on how to be that adaptable individual and how to deal with those unforeseen circumstances that might come at them, what's maybe one or two practical things that they can do that helps them maybe start building that up?
Right. So, well, the first thing, again, really great question because it breeds more questions. I love good questions that breed more questions, right? So the question is, why am I worried about the future? So that's number one. So the self-inquiry, why do I need to know what the future is going to hold? And we can sort of tease that down because you'll tease it back down to early life experiences when you didn't feel safe. So that one question allows us to heal something old so that we can just put that aside. Just, when I'm working with somebody and you're working with a good coach or a healer, whatever that may be, that concern about I need to know what's going to happen in the future is telling us a lot. It's saying that somewhere in your history, in your belief system, is a fear that come what may, I'm not going to be okay. And I need to know, I need to make sure. So this idea of controlling my environment, why am I controlling? Because I don't feel safe. I don't feel fear. But rationally, everything's fine. You've got money in the bank, your job is okay, you've got friends, whatever that may be. And so it's not an intellectual thing. So that's the first thing, is just to be open to that notion that, okay, I'm recognizing that there is a fear there that I have the opportunity to heal. And so the next thing is that, again, looking at rationally, I know that everything's okay right now. So the next thing we want to do is be able to calm the stress response. Because if I'm worried about that future, that means fear is active, which means the stress response is now activated, or the fear response is activated, which makes the brain divert to 5-year-old mode rather than 50-year-old mode. And when I can regulate that stress response, activate the parasympathetic nervous system, I have better access to being in the now, to having hope, having more awareness and ability to recognize solutions, to understand that everything can be okay, that I have the resources to handle things. So first step is self-awareness, self-inquiry. Second step is stress regulation, whether you're doing deep breathing or the vagal breath, which is take an inhale and then take another inhale and then exhale. So that will sort of stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system to get yourself into a state of calm. And the third step is what I really, really underline is self-compassion. Because we always tell ourselves we should be doing something. We should be better, we should have more. And every time you should, you trigger the stress response, you go into fear. Every time you should, you elicit shame. And so by going into could or compassion, where you say, I'm human, it's okay that I feel this way, I have an opportunity to heal and get grounded, then that system really can relax, and then you have access to that prefrontal cortex, you have more top-down control, and now you can actually create solutions for your future that aren't based in fear.
One of the things that I love that response, because that really is very high level. And as you were explaining just that whole process, it really, at least for me, made me think a lot of the burnout issue that we're having systemically across the board in pretty much every industry all over the world. And obviously, the one that gets highlighted the most is in healthcare. How much of what you more or less just outlaid there would you relate to burnout, and not necessarily just on broken systems, which we're going to touch on, but this is not just about broken systems, and it's not about overwork. How much of it comes into play with just the mindset that we have about that security and the fear, and especially as it relates to making mistakes and whatnot in healthcare?
Yeah, it's really, again, there's so many factors that are involved that leads to any individual getting into that burnout phase. But having said that, there are people that are more likely to get burned out than others. As you mentioned, healthcare providers, people that have the caretaker archetype, the personality of I need to take care of others, and that's how I deem my value is through taking care of others. And so that person is always going to try to take care of other people, and it will happen at their own expense. And so that person has a higher tendency to get burnt out. The overachievers, or the high, the people who are actually quite resilient or seem resilient, and high performers, if you will, are also people that have a tendency to burn out, again, because their value is based on performance. Their internal locus is, if I get this done, I will feel good, unconsciously. And so they're always needing to move and get things done and be productive and do. Now, on one hand, it supported them to be highly successful. But on the other hand, that focus is so focused, it's so laser focused, that it happens at the expense of often of their health, of taking care of themselves, of their relationships, and many other things, their sleep and so on and so forth. So the system eventually will break down.
One thing I wanted you to kind of dive into, because there's definitely a lot that goes on in the mind. And what goes on in the mind really can affect the body. And so you're talking about the parasympathetic
Nervous system. Yep.
Nervous system, yeah. And I'm wondering that there's always a spiritual component to this, and that's kind of one of the things that you get into too, which is like soul guided leadership and how this affects spirit. Can you just kind of elaborate a little bit on that, on how that is important in this whole thing as well?
Absolutely. I think what people get sort of scared with the term spirituality, and I encourage people just to think about it as the profound sense of belonging to something greater than.
But why do you
And
think people are scared of that?
I think it's because it's just gotten a really bad rap. It's been sort of like really woo woo. Either it's, religion and, religion is bad, or, whether it's fanatical or they just don't believe in religion, or sort of this spiritual conscious community that seems really out there and woo woo, and many of whom who are still doing the same thing but calling it spiritual. And and really, spirituality is very, very simple, and it's something that's innate. It means we're born with it. We're born with the longing, this deep, deep longing and desire to feel like we're connected to something bigger. That's all spirituality is. All right. That desire, the connection to something greater than, which most of us have when we go out in nature, right? That sense of deep, deep connection where we feel like, not only are we a drop in the ocean, but we're an ocean in a drop, right? And it's sort of that boundless vastness, connectedness. And then when we're in that space, it's like morphine being dropped into our brain and the dopaminergic reward system that's being triggered, and we believe anything is possible. And in that state, we tend to help others, be kinder, be in a state of love, but we're also healthier, more resilient, because when you're expansive, right, you're pliable and flexible. When you're rigid and constricted and you feel all alone and helpless and hopeless, you're more breakable. Okay, so it literally creates more pliability, flexibility, resiliency, buoyancy, softness in the mind-body system when we are spiritually connected, whichever way that has meaning for you.
When you're working with like a business owner or an entrepreneur, and I'm sure just especially with your background, you can identify rather quickly where it's like, I don't know if it's so much the mindset here. I don't know if it's so much maybe the body, but maybe like what do you look for when you're working with someone where you're like, I think this is a spirit thing that needs to be developed in order for them to have a more kind of a holistic business journey?
It's a very good question. Let me think about that one, because I don't necessarily, break things down to one thing or another. The body always tells. you know, when people speak. So language is very important, and the way people speak and the way they reflect and the way they think about things will tell me everything I need to know. And it'll tell me their level of self-awareness. It will tell me their level of connection to their body, the connection to other people, the connection to, what they're attached to. So ultimately, we want to be able to be the Zen masters of our life, right? Or Zen warriors or gentle warriors, whatever you want to be, but in a way that you're able to go through the world and do things in the world without getting rigid or hurt, right? With just being able to be smooth. And so everyone is different. And some people are really dialed in their nutrition. So I don't need to focus on that, but most people aren't. So I'll focus on that. Many people are dialed in on their physical fitness, but could use a little bit of tweaks in that. Most people who do come to me are in sort of this precipice of in between. I've been successful. I've done what I need to do. Now what? And they're kind of in this transitional place of, who the hell am I? And what am I doing with my life? And so that is really fun, because that's sort of that spiritual crisis, if you will. And so those, that happens frequently. Most people need support in that. And then, of course, being able to do self-inquiry and be able to ask oneself questions, to be able to help and improve their relationships. I mean, it's just going to be maybe a little bit more one pillar than the other, but I think everybody gets work on each of the pillars.
When we're looking at success in business and life, it's fair to say that a lot of it is psychological, right? I think what is like 80% of business is psychological, 20% of tactics. But then you meet a lot of business owners, and you find before maybe they get to that transitional phase, they just, all right, give me another strategy, or just tell me this thing I can do to make myself better, versus maybe not wanting to do the work because to your point, those high performers, they just kind of in that go mentality, and not maybe wanting to take as much time to really self-discover. Still within their own life of trying to making some improvement, as well as in the business, when you're looking at an aspect where there maybe needs to be a better system or a better process. You had mentioned something really interesting, but just when you're talking to somebody about actually, hey, you definitely need to create a system here, and this is what is creating some chaos. What is your major focus with that business owner or individual as it relates to building a system that really works?
So the first step is self-awareness, right? And this is the other thing. I say that I'm in the freedom business. And what I am inviting people to do is actually not work. And most people, because I've also was, like I said, goal-oriented, hyper-focused, high achiever. I don't have time to meditate. I want to get things done. And so I get that. And the point here is you don't have to change that. What you may want to do is just pay attention to your gas gauge and ask some questions. And it doesn't take a lot of time, and it doesn't take a lot of work. In fact, when my executives do these things, they find that they're working less, that it's easier, and that when they take a moment to pause and pay attention to how they feel and self-correct, what happens afterwards is easy. It's actually less work. They have boundless energy. They communicate more effectively. They make better decisions. And so the first step is always going to be self-awareness.
It comes to then creating some, nowadays you hear a lot of talk on being more efficient, but then also leading to more productivity. But then we don't really factor in maybe the well-being of either the individual or the employees. And you see people putting systems in place, but then they're not really gauging if it's making it easier for the actual people involved, right? Maybe it's a company or a hospital, and they say, we have this new system and this is what we're doing and we're good. And then everybody else who's using it is saying, this is actually making our lives more challenging and more difficult. So when you're talking to a company about, creating this system, how do you actually guide them maybe through that? You get them through the self-reflection process, but then how do you guide them through putting in something in place that actually just works and makes everybody else's life around them a lot easier?
Right. And so when you go into a place of self-awareness and groundedness, right, then your objective changes, right? It's not fear-based anymore. So if what I'm doing is fear-based, it's based on, oh, I have to save this company or else we're going to die, I will be blindsided to everything and everyone else. It's like a horse with blinders. Literally, signals get sent to the prefrontal cortex, and it's bottom-up control versus top-down control. And that's going to control everything. You don't care. You don't pay attention to anyone else. You're not looking at anything else. You're not looking at your people. You're not getting to know your people because you need to save the company. So when we get rid of that, we calm the fear. We get into a place of presence. Then you can see everything in front of you. You can see your people. You can ask the right questions. You actually have more information to make better decisions. And so once they do that, it's get to know your people. Understand what really is needed. Find out the why. Why are things going awry? What is the problem? Do some digging. And then from that, you can come up with some solutions that actually work. And, really looking at, do the people in your business know their role? Are the roles redundant? Right people in the right roles. Is this person's strengths, this person's weakness? But if you're just focusing on the bottom line, you're not seeing anything in between. So it's creating systems that you're able to see your people, make sure you have the right people in the right positions, then create those systems, have everybody in the right place, and create accountability structures.
It seems like that's kind of one of the things that I think a lot of people probably might struggle with is, at what point is the team maybe just giving you pushback, and so we call it like the adoption rate, right? When you implement a new strategy or a new protocol or system, like how quickly can the team adopt it fully and perfectly? And it's like, depending on what it is, it could be a day or it could be like literally 6 months, just depending on what it is. How much of it do you measure, whether it's like, okay, they are just having a hard time adjusting to change, but it's for the greater good, or they're just, or the feedback is legit that we're trying to implement something that we thought could be better, but it's actually not?
Well, that's the thing. It takes due diligence. It takes somebody caring to find out the why, right? So we always want to know the why, the how, and the what, and then the what if, right? And if we don't ask those questions, then we're going to actually be spending more time and money later. So if,
Good one, the what if.
yeah,
Like what if this doesn't work, or what if we don't get the result, and actually building out contingencies off of a what if.
exactly.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That's exactly right. So what if is what we do when we face our fears, right? It's not pushing a fear away. It's saying, what if this happens? What's my plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D? So that way I'm never in fear. I'm always able, I have what I would desire. This would be best case scenario, but worst case scenario, I'll be okay too, right? Because we've come in with contingencies. So when we're working with employees, sometimes it's a really good strategy, but you have the wrong people working for you, or you have people that aren't skilled and they just need to learn. So maybe you say, well, I'm going to invest in my people to teach them this new strategy so that it's a win-win. They feel that I care about them because I'm supporting them to grow and to learn. And I'm going to then have an employee who knows how to do this certain skill set, so it's a win-win. So I'm going to invest in my people that ultimately invest in my product and what I'm doing.
One thing I mentioned, I've noticed an observation from what you're saying a little bit earlier, is that you've given out a handful of different strategies that could be helpful for someone to manage stress and kind of build that resiliency. As a leader, do you feel like that works with everybody, or do you have to kind of find what strategies can work for you and build out your own toolkit?
Everybody's going to need or want or like different strategies. Some people, it's just sort of, there's a whole toolbox, there's a basket of tools for people. And then they can, pick and choose. But the first thing is actually knowing what those tools are and why. Why would I need them? Why do I want to use them? And again, when you know the difference between functioning from a place of stress and fear versus functioning from a place of clarity and balance, they're very two different states. And then you want to be in that latter state. And so you'll do whatever it is you need to do to get into that latter state, and you have a toolbox to get there. Right?
I really, really like that, because I think oftentimes, I think Dan and I've seen it quite a few times where someone is trying to adopt what works for somebody else. Yeah. And they're like, this is so stupid, I tried it. And you're like, well, you need to try like a variation of things and actually, give it a fair shake, and then basically create your own toolkit of what works for you instead of discarding the whole thing. Do you run into that too? I'm sure sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, I talked about COMT. So the slow COMT people don't get as much benefit from long meditations as fast COMT people, because they already have a lot of dopamine, right? So there are certain interventions that, aren't don't change as much for them as they do for the fast metabolizers. So there's a lot of different factors, and there's no one right way. That's the beauty. But what is the right thing is figuring out what the difference between being in a state of contraction and fear and stress versus being in a state of balance, expansiveness, knowing, groundedness, and presence. When you know the difference between those two, then you can make a choice. You always have a choice. Do I like this feeling? Do I want to stay here? Or do I want to be in a different place? If I want to be in a different place, what are my tools? What are the things I can do? Who can I talk to? I can, take a walk in nature. I can do some deep breathing exercises. I can do a cold plunge, whatever that may be. But it's what's my goal? It's just like anything else, right? Leader, you have a vision. And then from that vision, you create the goals. And from those goals, you then create the strategies. So it's really no different.
Hang time was like that. We lost your audio there.
Can we do a quick audio check on your end by any chance, Eva?
Everything okay? Can you hear me? I can hear you.
Now you're back. Crazy.
Oh, that's weird. I didn't touch anything. That's so weird. Oh,
He's our producer. He's fired, so we're good.
operator error.
If there's anything out of this whole episode, I hope it was just that. And it's like, that's the part that went silent.
Where were we?
I can go back to that, that it's about, creating a vision.
Yes, please. Yeah, that's important.
So a leader, a lot of when I work with people, especially again, transition or whatever that may be, and we start with is creating a vision and we feel into that vision. What is that? What would that vision feel like and look like in the future? And then from that vision, you can create goals. And then from those goals, you can create the strategy. So it's not very different that when it comes to your own well-being and resilience. What do I want to feel like? What's my vision of myself? What does that feel like? What are the goals that could get me there? And then what's my strategy? And everyone's going to have a different strategy.
I love that, and that's definitely something that we've utilized. It's talking to people about who's the person you want to become, and then almost what actions do you need to start taking to become that person. Versus, I think some people just get caught up in it's going to manifest it or it's going to happen. And it's just you have to do the work and have the right techniques to do it. And this, as you're talking there, it almost makes me think of this conversation around work-life balance, where it's not just even for the leadership and, the high achievers and the owners and the entrepreneurs and whatnot. And then how to communicate the message to the employees, where a lot of them are saying, hey, I don't have any balance in my life. And there's the discussion between there is no balance. It's more about being intentional. How do you actually approach that conversation? And I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are there.
Well, I smile because my friends know that I hate that term, the work-life balance. I think it's absolutely hilarious and funny. It's just balance. Right? Because we do things and we don't do things. We're human beings. We're not human doings. But we do things because we're human. So it's the difference between doing and non-doing, right? You're not awake all the time. You also have to sleep. You can't, lift, the same weight all the time and use the same muscle group all the time. You need to give it a rest. So there's periods of recovery and there are periods of doing. So it's creating balance between periods of doing and periods of non-doing. That's really what we're creating balance in. So you can have balance and be somebody who really loves to work. That it's not something that you don't not enjoy. You love working. The question is, do you have periods of rest in between? How high are the stress levels when you're working? Because you're engaged. There needs to be periods of downtime. Do you have other things in your life outside of work that bring you joy and, love or happiness or expansiveness, whatever that may be. So it's finding the things in your life that support you to thrive, whatever that may be. But remembering that there's periods of doing and there's periods of non-doing, and how to bring balance into your life with that.
So when we're, and that's a great point, because you mentioned it. There's no, you just look at all the aspects of life that we have, or the aspects of even running a business, and everything across the board can't be the same in terms of effort and even just time that we have. So when we're, you're working with people and they're articulating the aspect of, I need more about, or what does that look like for them? It's just more about, it's not like you're saying, it's just more about when you're giving yourself some time to kind of go into some other aspects of life. You're giving yourself a little breather from maybe certain parts, like, you said, work. If somebody finding joy in 80 hours or 90 hours of work a week, that they have some downtime just to maybe give their body and brain a rest. That's basically what you're saying there?
It could be that. It could be all different types of things, but it's also remembering, why am I working 80 hours a week? What's the end goal? Like, is fear involved? Because is fear of my driving force that I need to feel valued and I need to make money and I need to feel famous or whatever that may be, and I'm attached to an outcome, then it's going to be very difficult for me to find that balance. But when I let go of that outcome and I say, I enjoy doing these things, I get to do these things, we shift over into an opportunity or growth mindset of I get to, not I have to. It changes the physiological dynamics in the mind and body, and then we're more likely going to find joy in the things that we do. And there's also this notion of, I have to work all the time. I have to do these things. So again, we deny ourselves the ability to do other things that we really could enjoy, and we feel guilty about it because we say, I should be working. So there's a whole psychological piece, a psycho-spiritual piece that I encourage people to look at, which again gets them into a place of more self-awareness, more balance within, so that they can then create balance in their lives. And again, work might be something you really love and enjoy. That's great. Let's bring out other things into your life that you can also love and enjoy so that you can have a really rich life.
I got a question for you. What are some kind of counterintuitive narratives that are out there that's kind of going against the grain of what you're teaching? Like because there does seem to be this grind culture, especially around workforces, where like you just need to put your head down, you need to just fight for it, you need to, quit being a bitch, quit being a little punk, quit being a wimp, just get after it. What are some things that are out there that are really kind of hurting what you're trying to teach?
Well, I think that this notion of grit is important, right? So when you're climbing a mountain, it's not easy. And you need, for some reason, you have to get to the top of the mountain. Let's say there's water building up, there's a flood building up. And yeah, you do need to get to the top of that mountain. And so the grit to push through, that's a positive thing. Athletes have it. Many of us have it. We have just the grit to keep going. And that's what most of our culture has been based in resilience, especially in the work on resilience, has been on grit, which is great. Grit is great. However, if that's all you got, it's a problem. That's where you're going to burn out. If it's not coming from a place of balance, of I'm okay, and I'm going to feed my engine. I'm going to fuel my engine so that I could climb up that mountain. I'm going to put my head down and really work through this because it's worth it to me, because it's aligned with my values. Then I will fill up my gas tank with everything I need, the support, the nutrition, whatever, to get through this difficulty if that seems like it's aligned for me. But the problem is that people aren't aligning whatever they're gritting with their internal values, right? They're doing something because they think they need to or they have to, not because they want to. And that's where we start having problems.
This is popping into my head. There's this word in Korean called han, and what it means is it's kind of big in the culture, in Korean culture, which is using negativity, resentment, anger, fear as a driving force for success. And also, like, Korea has like, it's a highly competitive, it actually has like, I think number 1, number 2 suicide rate in the world out of all the countries. Like, it's very, very high. And
Big shame.
yeah. So there's incredible kind of push to be excellent, but using almost like if we're using like a Star Wars, analogy where it's like you're using dark side energy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so when you're kind of describing that just now, it sounds like you need to have a balancing act. It's like where appropriate, yes, use the anger, but also where appropriate, use the joy, use the fulfillment, use the love, use the humor to get to where you want to go. Is that kind of more or less what you're saying?
Yeah. So let's talk about emotions. So emotions are like our signals. They're messengers. They're like hunger or cold. They're the way your body is letting you know where you're at. They're telling you what's happening internally, whether or not you feel safe. They're messengers that help you communicate with others, and they inform your decisions. So there's no other powerful force that drives us than anger and fear. It is a driving force and absolutely necessary. Without our negative emotions, we would never get ourselves out of danger, and we'd never have any change, and we'd never have any innovation. Nothing would ever happen in the world. Having said that, it's not sustainable. So emotions are there to motivate. They're not there to keep you engaged. So love is for maintenance. Fear is for change, for initiating a change. Okay, so that's why it's important, again, when you're self-aware and calm, you can recognize fear and you have the emotional intelligence to use top-down control and say, what's this trying to tell me and what can I do? What are my options? What are the what ifs? What's the why, how, what, and what if? But when you're in fear or anger, the fight or flight response shuts down that top. And so you're in a bottom up control. And so you're driven by, this 12-year-old or 5-year-old versus, 50-year-old. And, and all the things that lead to, I've got to get this done. I've got to get this done. And everything else doesn't matter, including your own health. And before you know it, you're burnt out or dead or sick.
It's interesting they say that, and I honestly I can relate. I think about my younger self. I have a lot of natural anger in me. It's there. I don't know how much you subscribe to personality indexes or like something like the DISC, but I'm a high D, and I could just turn it on anytime I want. But it's the aspect of what you just said there, which is understanding what are the consequences of living in that state of mind, so to speak, or that energy all the time. And I feel like a lot of times we focus on the good stuff that we get out of it, but then we don't really take the time to, as you said, self-reflect and figure out what are the negative consequences of living like this and working with people like this all the time. And I know for me that was like a big game changer once I started asking some of those questions of what am I creating negatively or maybe missing out on. That was like the light bulb moment for me. I want to maybe not make a hard shift here, but in the grand scheme of just being healthy overall, we've done a lot on the mental aspect of it, and even some brain chemistry. What are some things that individuals, especially not just the ones that are pedal to the metal going full force, what are some things in general people can do nowadays to just maybe even extend their their lifespan a little bit? Some healthy habits that we can do to start just living longer, but making sure that it's not a matter of, hey, I want to reach 100, but maybe a healthy 100, so to speak, versus being 80 and having the last 20 years of my life really being in a horrible state. So what are some things now that you're talking to people about to get them on a journey of longevity with really good health?
Right. We want quality. We want quality life. We want a life full of richness. So, and the beauty of it, there's a lot that we can do. And that's what's this exciting part with all the innovation and what we know. So, number one is your diet, is making sure that you get nutrient-rich foods into your diet. There is this whole field of nutritional psychiatry or metabolic psychiatry. We know that there is a very strong gut-brain connection. It's connected with inflammation and the vagal nerve. Your gut is your secondary brain. 95% of your serotonin comes from your gut. It's one of your largest immune organs. When you take care of your gut, you take care of your brain, you take care of the rest of your body, and you'll be able to be calmer, be happier, and to have a healthier and happier life. So nutrient-rich diet, which means lots of fruits and vegetables, lean meats if you eat that, lean proteins, a few nuts and seeds, and some whole grains done in a balanced way, feeding the microbiome that live in the gut. That will support you to stay uninflamed and cognitively still with it. So there's all types of things that you can do to improve the gut and to improve the diet. So that's number one. The other one is sleep. Sleep. One of the problems that most of the executives I work with is they don't sleep, whether it's their travel schedule or whatever that may be. We want to find ways to try to get into some type of routine for sleep, even when you're traveling, like going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, no electronics before bed, at least an hour before bed, unplugging, getting rid of that blue light, having dark, quiet sleep environment where you can really get that adequate recovery during sleep is very, very important. In that saying that, I often recommend for people to get whatever devices they can that can check their heart rate variability, check their sleep, whether it's an Oura ring or anything like it. It also can give you some feedback on what's going on. And there's, of course, many different supplements that people can take should they need to support with their sleep and their sleep hygiene. The third one is movement, is moving your body. We know that a sedentary lifestyle decreases the lifespan and many, many other problems. So the more you move, whatever that may be, whether it's walking or lifting weights or dancing or whatever that may be, the recommendation is to move. The fourth thing is getting out in nature. We know that nature deprivation or the lack of being in nature is detrimental to the brain and to the rest of the body as well as the immune system. And then you can get microdoses, like 5 minutes here and there or 20 minutes a day, can improve your brain, your mood, and your immune system. So getting out in nature is the other one. And then the fifth one is really, developing some type of practice where you can stimulate that vagal response, whether you're doing it through vagal devices or through meditation practices, which I highly recommend, breathing exercises throughout the day. So, those are sort of the kind of five cardinals. There's a lot of things that come out after that. Actually, the sixth one is actually having fun. I really think it's important to unplug and go and be with people you really care about, or do something you're really passionate about, something that gives you joy. And especially, if it gives you a sense of purpose and meaning, even better.
Yeah, that's really good. I think the one thing I would probably just add there, which is what you just ended with, is just this aspect of joy in our life. And I know it's been probably a little challenging for me at sometimes, just like a lot of people, to being able to maybe even reconnect with, that inner child. And sometimes we just take life probably a little too serious. I know I take things just a little too serious, and it's just doing stuff that makes you happy and not being, guilty about it. If you just want to, go to the park, shoot some hoops, stuff like that. But, and Antonio had something there you wanted to add.
Yeah, no, I really love everything here. I wanted to ask, like, if someone's trying to connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
They can go to my website. There's a contact form at drselhub.com, drselhub.com. I'm all over the social media channels, so you can reach me through there. I'm posting content daily. I also have a really exciting new program I just launched a month and a half ago, called the Foundations of Mastering Resilience, a do-it-yourself program. And it has everything that I've talked about and more, and sort of 10 weeks of videos and audio and workbooks and all kinds of good stuff. And that's available on learnworlds.com. I'm happy for people to reach out to me. I love being connected.
Yes. So just thank you so much. I learned a lot, and I'm definitely going to go back to this and implement some of the stuff that you talked about, because Lord knows everybody needs it. But I think there was some stuff where I was like, I really need to jump back into having a little bit more fun and sleeping better.
Yeah, look, fun, that's why I said I'm in the freedom business. Because and it's not work. You're letting go. You're sort of loosening your grip on all these things you thought were so important for your well-being, understanding that you're already in well-being. You're already there. And this is about sustaining it and allowing it to flourish and to grow. And if I keep holding on to something that I think isn't there, then I'm going to miss out. I'm going to miss out on now. So it's not about having a vision of what can happen, but remember that you're already there. If you envision yourself thriving and alive and happy, you're already there. You're not becoming that person. You're already that person. So then the question is how do I sustain it?
That's how you end it. Doc, This was great. Loved it. Thank you so much for joining us. It was phenomenal.